Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Joanne Smedley, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Captain Dmitry Konenkov. We warmly welcome the family of Lieutenant Arthur Leslie Rush, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From Western Australia, Carmel Adventist College and Blansdale Christian School. And from the Northern Territory, Nhulunbuy Primary School. If you are able, please stand and join in the singing of the National Anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths of floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Arthur Leslie Rush. Arthur Rush was born in May 1888 in Bundanon, New South Wales. Known as Paddy to his friends and family, he was one of 9 children born to Jemima and Philip Rush. He grew up in Bundanon and attended school in nearby Wingilla. The family endured hardship when Rush's father Philip died in 1907, and his older brother Harry died in a motorcycle accident in 1914. By 1915, Rush had married Eileen Linda Williams and was working as an orchardist in Bundanon. Rush enlisted in a Southern Imperial Force in August 1915. After a period of training in Australia, he embarked for the war on a transport ship, Euripides, which left Sydney in early November. On arrival in Egypt, Rush trained at the Australian camp in Tel El Kabir and the School of Instruction at Zaytun, where he learned how to use a machine gun and was transferred to the 14th Machine Gun Company. Rush then sailed with his company to France to join the major British offensive on the Western Front. Arriving in France in June 1916, the 14th Machine Gun Company saw its first action in the town of Fromelles. The Australian forces were to create a feint at the northern town to draw German forces away from the larger British offensive further south along the Somme. However, the Germans achieved a decisive defensive victory, and the battle was later described as the worst 24 hours in Australian military history, with over 5,000 casualties, nearly 2,000 of whom had been killed. The horrors of the war were to continue. In August 1916, Rush was able to meet up with his youngest brother, Lance Corporal Frederick Erskine Rush, in the trenches of the front line. As they were talking, a German shell exploded nearby and wounded Frederick, who later died of his wounds. Rush wrote to his family back in Australia, "The shock must be far worse for you all so far away than for me, and God knows it was a terrible shock to me too." Rush had shown promise as a soldier and was promoted to corporal in September and sergeant in January 1917. In 1917, he spent several months training in France, away from the front lines. This included preparing for gas attacks and learning how to use the machine gun for anti-aircraft purposes. In late September 1917, British and Commonwealth forces launched a major offensive across northern France and into Belgium. Their objective was to push the German forces out of Flanders, and one of the early engagements was at Polygon Wood in Belgium. Here, Rush stayed at his machine gun post despite losing several crew members as casualties. He was able to help hold off a much larger counter-attacking German force. His commanding officer later praised Rush for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty. Rush was awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal, and for his display of leadership, was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. After the battle, he was evacuated to England with a severe infection in his hand. He returned to his unit at the end of December 1917. As the weather warmed up, the Germans were preparing for what was to be their last major offensive of the war, now known as German Spring Offensive. In the Somme sector, German forces heavily bombarded the French town of Villers-Bretonneux in April 1918, before capturing it with infantry. On the 25th of April 1918, a British and an Australian counterattack successfully recaptured the town and stabilized the Allied defenses in this sector. During the fighting, Rush was marking a reconnaissance of German gun position when he came under heavy machine gun fire and died instantly. Arthur Rush is buried in Adelaide Cemetery in Villers-Bretonneux, one of nearly 1,000 Commonwealth soldiers buried there. He was survived in Australia by his mother and siblings and his wife Lydia. He was 29 years old. 3 of Arthur's brothers also served in the Australian Imperial Force. In addition to Frederick, who died in 1916, his eldest brother, Private Field Charles Rush, who had served in the Boer War, and his younger brother, Sapper John Herbert Rush, both returned to Australia. Lieutenant Arthur Leslie Rush is listed on Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Arthur Leslie Rush, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening.